2:13 a.m. You sit bolt upright and stare at the doorway. There's a person there. At least your brain says there is. Until the lamp clicks on and it becomes a coat hanging on a chair. The terrifying part isn't the shadow. It's how fast your mind turned nothing into a threat. At 2:13 a.m., you wake up and freeze. A person seems to be standing by the door. Then the light flips on, and it's just a coat draped over a chair. That jolt hits harder than fear itself because your brain already chose the monster before you could question it. And that's where the real story begins. What if your eyes are not recording devices at all? The visual cortex in the occipital lobe is constantly processing what comes in, but it needs contrast, edges, and clean patterns to identify anything. In near total darkness, those clues collapse. The signal gets so thin that your brain is left staring at almost nothing, and it hates that. So what does the brain do when the input disappears? It guesses. Researchers call some of those moments illusory perceptions, experiences that feel completely real even when the stimulus is ambiguous or missing. A ripple in the dark becomes a moving figure, a corner becomes a shape. And once the brain starts guessing, it rarely stays neutral for long. Why does that guess so often turn threatening? Because fear has a switch for that. The amygdala, your brain's threat detector, fires up when you're anxious or stressed and tells your attention to stay on high alert. Suddenly, the same hallway feels colder, the same darkness feels occupied, and your mind starts scanning for danger instead of truth. Here's the brutal part. Your brain would rather be wrong than uncertain. Predictive processing means it is always forecasting what it expects to see, then comparing that prediction with incoming data. In darkness, the data is weak, so the prediction wins more often. That's why a vague shape can feel like movement, even when nothing is moving at all. And no, that does not automatically mean something is wrong with you. Sleep deprivation, stress, and long stretches in the dark can all make mistaken perceptions more likely, even in healthy brains. Pull an all-nighter, stare into a dim room, and your mind gets sloppy fast. Once sleep and light drop, certainty does too. People hear the word hallucination and think it means one thing: madness. But many darkroom experiences are simpler than that. They're misinterpretations of real or absent input, not proof of psychosis. That difference matters. Because if you mistake a misperception for a mental breakdown, you miss the far stranger truth. Your brain is improvising under pressure. This has terrified people for centuries. In sleep paralysis, many cultures describe the same thing. The old hag, a shadow figure, a presence in the room while the body won't move. You wake up aware, trapped, and staring into darkness that suddenly feels crowded. And once you can't move, every shape in the room becomes part of the threat. Why does the shadow look human? Because your brain is built to detect faces fast. Face pareidolia is the reason you see eyes in outlets, mouths in clouds, and a face in the front of a car. The mind is tuned to recognize people before almost anything else. So in the dark, a coat, a chair, and a sliver of light can suddenly assemble into a standing figure. That mistake may be ancient. In survival terms, it was safer to think the rustle in the grass was a predator than to ignore it and get eaten. A false alarm costs you a scare. A missed threat could cost your life. So the brain evolved with a brutal rule: better safe than sorry. And that rule still runs in your hallway at midnight. Researchers have tested how much expectation shapes perception, and the answer is a lot. Work in the predictive processing literature, including studies published in Nature Neuroscience around 2010, showed that top-down expectations can bend how ambiguous input gets interpreted. In other words, what you think you'll see can color what you report seeing. And in the dark, expectation gets a megaphone. Then the loop starts. You spot a shape. You stare harder. You check it again. And every second of attention makes the uncertainty feel louder, not smaller. Fear feeds on missing information, So the room begins to seem more active than it really is. The shadow grows because your mind keeps returning to it. But what if something really is moving? Peripheral vision is better at catching motion than detail. So your edge vision can scream before your central vision knows what it saw. A curtain shifts, a fan turns, a shape at the edge of the room becomes a threat for one split second. The sensation is real, even when the conclusion is wrong. That's the deeper truth hiding in plain sight. Perception is not a camera feed. It's a best guess. In stress, you can hear your name in background noise. In dim light, you can mistake a coat rack for a person. The brain fills gaps because gaps feel dangerous. And once you see that, the supernatural explanation starts to look a lot less convincing. So why can fear create hallucination-like experiences? Because when information is scarce, the brain uses the fastest answer available. Researchers call some of these moments illusory perceptions, and they're basically the mind's emergency shortcut. It would rather hand you a false threat than leave you with no explanation at all. That's why the dark feels haunted. It gives your brain too little to trust. Here's the final twist. Your brain would rather invent an object than admit it can't identify one. In near total darkness, uncertainty itself feels like danger, so the mind reaches for a story. A shadow becomes a figure becomes a threat, and the story that wins is often the one that scares you most. That's survival, not magic. The dark doesn't just hide things, it forces your brain to decide what matters before it has enough proof. If you want more stories where psychology gets stranger than fiction, subscribe. The next one will make a familiar feeling look completely different.